I do.
All right. Welcome everyone to Amplify Women in Research. Today I'm very pleased to have Dr. Diane Mack, professor at Brock University in Kinesiology. She's also the associate editor of Sport, Exercise, and Performance Psychology. Dr. Mack's expertise are in behavior change and the promotion of well-being. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Mack.
Thank you so much. I'm quite humbled that you asked.
So the way I usually like to start this thing is to ask folks what got you started in this field, and was there anyone or anything in particular that got you started and kept you in the field?
Absolutely. Well, this is a story. What got me started is a story that I tell my undergraduate sports psychology class when I teach them. Because very often I hear from our undergraduates, I don't really know what I want to do. I'm interested in everything. And sort of, was that your experience? And I'm not going to lie, it wasn't my experience. And so for me, one of those big, aha or watershed moments actually happened in grade 8 for me. And I was invited at that time to a national training seminar. So it was a week away from home, and it was actually in Port Hope, Ontario that they had us. And at that time, they, in addition to all the, sport specific training, there was all sorts of off ice, because it was figure skating, but there was off ice sessions as well. And one of the individuals that they had come in and talk to us every day was a woman who was working with the Canadian Olympic Association in swimming. And at that time, she was working with Alex Bauman and Victor Davis, some of the big names in Canadian swimming, and she was a sports psychologist. And I had never heard of the field of sports psychology before. I never knew it was a thing or a job or, something a person could actually do as an adult. And so I came home from that seminar and I told my mom, the best part about it is I got to meet this woman who is a sports psychologist, and this is what I want to do. Now, my parents being my parents, sort of, and me being my age, sort of patted me on the shoulder, and that's great. Because probably before I went to this seminar, I wanted to be a pop star or a model or a dancer or, something I would have absolutely tragically failed at. And so I came home from that, again, grade 8, saying I want to be a sports psychologist. And from there, that's something I actually never really swayed from. So I no longer wanted to be a model or a dancer or a pop star. It was always, I wanted to be a sports psychologist. So for me, that was sort of the trigger, right? But obviously that has to be nurtured along the way. So from there, I place a whole lot of credit, to be perfectly honest, on not only my family, because I come from a family of researchers. They just research in different areas, but then also at Carleton University, my mentor was Dr. John Partington for my undergraduate and my master's. And then when I went to Western for my PhD, I received incredible mentorship, in particular from Dr. Bert Caron, but also from Dr. Craig Hall. And these are the people that along the way were able to actually develop some of my skills and support my skills from the kid in grade 8 who actually came home and said, I wanted to be a sports psychologist. Because if you don't have the background knowledge, the research, the mentors along the way to help you get there, you can say you want to do it, but it's not happening, sort of idea. So there was that one moment again that I decided that this is a career path that I actually wanted to pursue, and everything from there was designed to help me get there. But then I credit a lot of people along the way for actually making it happen.
Fantastic story. Yeah. Such a fun one, because those stories from when you have that sort of aha moment, I mean, they have different phases of life, but it's so great once you know, right? Like this is what I want to do.
Yes.
And the role of mentorship is so important, right? Like it really can make or break a career.
Completely. And it's, I've taken almost bits and pieces from each of my mentors, things I really liked about their style and how they interacted, things I didn't like about their style and how they interacted. But everything I do, I still carry pieces of them with me. Whether it be things that they told me, their foresight for the future of our field, their dogmatic approach to doing things, their passion about it, even when it gets hard, because it is harder more than not, as we both know very well. But I carry them with me all the time, and I'm finding as I get older and older, I'm actually reflecting more and more on some of the things that they told me and saying to myself and to others, they were right, they were right, they were right.
It's so funny when you're younger, you think, oh, you think you know things and you understand things, but it's true, as you get older, you reflect more and you think, oh, why didn't I realize that sooner? Or why didn't I think about that sooner? So it is nice to have these moments of reflection and say, oh, that's why that, or
and for the few students who I serve as their supervisor, I sort of wonder in 10, 15, 20 years time for them, are they going to carry me with them just a little bit? And what things are they going to recall that I may have said to them, or things that I said that were completely off base, that didn't come to fruition, or that I was just simply wrong about.
Yeah, exactly. So your work is in the area of sports psychology and promotion of well-being and behavior. What is some of your most impactful, highly cited work that you've done in your career?
Well, I guess I'm going to take two areas that I'll talk about. And the first, again, I credit with Dr. Bert Caron as a graduate student. And when I was working with him, he was invited to give a presentation for the Olympic Committee, International Olympic Committee, as one of their keynotes. And Bert Caron himself was very, very well known for his work in group dynamics in sport, and what to this day, still would probably be considered the most influential figure in it. But for whatever reason, for his presentation, he decided he wanted to do something completely different, not in sport even, and still looking at group dynamics to an extent, but he wanted to look at the social factor in exercise. And how being with others can actually change the experience of exercise, whether it be make us adhere more, make us enjoy it more, perhaps cause us more anxiety if we're with others doing it, things like that. And so he came up to myself and another of my colleagues, another PhD student, and said that he wanted to do this paper for the IOC, and would we help? Now, this is something that he didn't research, again, so we as his students didn't research the social factor in exercise, but he also wanted to apply a new technique to answering the question, which was, this technique is a meta-analysis. So the three of us along the way, Dr. Caron, Heather Hasenbloss, and myself, needed to not only learn about the area, but learn how to do a meta-analysis. A daunting task when we're all flying a little bit by the seat of our pants kind of idea. And so we ended up finishing that paper. He ended up giving the presentation. The paper itself was published, and it's probably one of my most highly cited papers. But one of the reasons that experience itself was so impactful to me is I've taken what I learned about meta-analyses at that point in time. So this was the early 90s, and applied it and applied it and applied it and grew and apply more contemporary techniques to it now. But just the opportunity to be involved in that has sort of also carried alongside with me. And I continue to do the odd meta-analysis when opportunity and interest gets me going. So that's one that I think is pretty important. And then I guess somewhat selfishly, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we started doing maybe 8 to 10 years ago in well-being, and in particular, a kind of well-being called eudaimonic well-being. And eudaimonic well-being is really about the idea of functioning well. So functioning in our social lives well, functioning in our own space well, mastery experiences, self-acceptance is an element of eudaimonic well-being, but so too are things like purpose in life and personal growth. And those are elements of well-being for me that really resonate with how I want to live my life. I want it to have purpose, and I want to continue learning and growing. And so perhaps a little naively, but also maybe a little bit selfishly, I'll say that some of the work that we started doing in sport and in physical activity, looking at whether or not sport and physical activity can contribute to eudaimonic well-being, might be also some of my most meaningful work. Maybe because we were one of the first groups to actually quite systematically continue to look at it over time. But also now I see other research groups, not only in Canada, North America, but internationally, also looking at this idea of eudaimonic well-being as it's applied to sport and physical activity. So I wouldn't say that that's my most highly cited, but right now, just based on where some of my headspace is and some of my interests are, it's some of the stuff I'm most proud of, because I see other people taking it up as well.
Oh, I love that, because there's two important points to me from what you just said. So the first one is take the time to do your grad work well, right? Because it does impact the rest of your career. And we're seeing more and more even grad students getting caught up in this publish or perish. And it's like, no, just do a couple of papers really well. So yeah. I like that story of your grad work. And then the second story around the work that you're doing now, I think is so important, because it's not just about those citations, right? It's about the impact and your joy in doing work. So I think that's an important story to tell as well. Like, you can't just keep doing the work to chase those citations, but it has to be something meaningful. And sometimes the most impactful and meaningful work affects policies and impacts people's lives, and you don't get a bump in your H index. But you get a bump in feeling good, right? So
yeah. And thank you for what you said, because actually that's really meaningful to me as well. The work that I did as a grad student with Bert and Heather on that one paper, that wasn't part of my dissertation, right? That was something completely outside of the dissertation, something that we spent a lot of time working on. But it's something that I've been able to carry over and was really meaningful. Again, the work on eudaimonic well-being, it's something that when I started reading it, it excited me again. And again, we've talked about the challenges of research, the challenges of getting things published, the peer review process and the like. If you can still have some investment and interest in the topic, it just makes doing the hard things a little bit easier.
100%. Actually, so that brings us to the next question. And the funny story here is, of course, the reason you were on my radar for this was because you were the associate editor that rejected one of the papers that my student and I submitted. But it was funny because I had one of those weeks, I had like 2 or 3 rejections that week. And your rejection email stood out to me because it was actually kind. Like, you took the time. It was clear to me that you took the time to read the paper, to read the reviews, and really deliberate on the decision. Whereas I'm finding, and so are my colleagues finding, more and more the emails you get from editors are just, they haven't really read it. They're just kind of basing it off their reviews. And sometimes they haven't even read the reviews. It's kind of clear. So I was pleased to see the way you handled that role. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to chat about your role. So you're associate editor, like we said, for sport, exercise, and performance psychology. So I'm curious what it sort of made, what led you to make the decision to take on that role? Because it is a pretty significant service commitment. And based on what you've been seeing in that role, do you have some sort of lessons or tips for folks submitting papers to journals?
Sure. What led me to take on the role was sort of a natural progression. And you would know this, right? So as a student, you try, and as a faculty member, you try and get some papers out. And once you start getting some papers out, sometimes journals will contact you and say, we'd like you to review. And I remember feeling a fair fair bit of pride when I was asked to review, and taking that job very seriously. And then from there, the next stage of the next progression was actually to sit on editorial boards or review boards. And there became a stage in my career where I sat on, 7 or 8 different journals on their review boards. And again, a sizable commitment. And so from there, the next sort of progression to that is actually serving as an associate editor and then editor from there. And so part of it was just logical, right? This is how it typically unfolds, or how it can unfold. But part of it also was I took a little bit of pride in the invitation, just like I actually took a fair bit of pride and was quite humbled by your invitation, especially given the event that precipitated it. So, because to me, being asked to serve in this role meant that the work that I was trying to publish was getting seen. But probably as important to me was that the feedback I was giving to authors when I was reviewing their manuscript, whether it be as a reviewer or as an editorial board member, was thoughtful and detailed and comprehensive. So I take that element of my job very seriously, doing the reviews and sitting on review boards. And so to me, that was a little bit of recognition from people who are more senior, more established in their careers, that I was doing that work well, because you're right, it is service. And service tends to be very tertiary to some of the other elements of our job of teaching and research. And so I actually took a fair bit of pride in that other people thought I would do a good job in this role and asked me to do this role. And so I really, really enjoyed doing it. And I continue to enjoy doing it with sport, exercise, and performance psychology. I think this is about my 5th year of serving in the associate editor role. I have no interest in moving up to editor, not gonna lie, but I very much enjoyed this stage of it. So that next level of natural progression, I don't ever see happening.
Yeah, it's funny. Many of us often wonder why you would want to take that role on. It just seems like a very onerous role to take on, right? So
it can be.
So you've been doing this for 5 years, but you sat on several editorial boards. Do you have any like common errors that you see, or just suggestions for researchers?
Certainly. I think, for me, I'll say the common errors probably represent some of my preferences and things that I consider to be best practice, as opposed to something that I think if you surveyed all associate editors or editors, they would all agree with me on this. But there's a few areas that for me are pretty important. One, I've always been a believer that the question that you ask matters. And so to be able to ask an interesting question, but as more important to that, be able to tell me why that question's important. And it's got to be more than, well, we haven't answered this question in this sample. So, for example, all of the research that has been done answering this question has been done on elite level athletes. We don't know whether we would find the same patterns, same relationships, same differences on high school level athletes. Tell me why that matters, right? And so what I really like to see is a multi-pronged argument, 2, 3 reasons why your question is contributing to what's already out there. Because very few of us have a so remarkably novel question that we're asking that hasn't been done. We're always chipping away at other people's work. And if it's always just a sliver of a chip, chipping away, that can still matter. It really can, but you've got to tell me why. And also, I think it's important to sort of understand that an associate editor will get assigned manuscripts because of the knowledge that they have, but it's not necessarily an area that they are regularly reading, regularly publishing in things like that. So I know for sport exercise and performance psychology, I tend to get anything in group dynamics because of my history with Dr. Caron, anything in imagery because of my history with Dr. Hall, anything linked to well-being, mental health, things like that. And while I do the mental health stuff, I feel quite comfortable with, the work I did in imagery and the work I did in group dynamics ended a number of years ago. It's not that it's not interesting, it really is. It's just, we don't do it all sort of idea. And so you really, to me, anybody submitting that paper really has to convince me why this matters. And ideally it's not only just sample, but it's theoretically why this matters, measurement why this matters, design why this matters, that kind of idea. So that's one big thing, the question and why it matters. And then another issue to me often is analyses. I think right now, some people like to apply the fanciest analysis out there for a question that maybe has been answered 50 times with more simplistic analyses. So simply because you know the most recent analytic approach or the most complex analytic approach doesn't mean you have to use it, or doesn't mean that the question that you're answering is in fact important. And I will profess that some of the publications I'm on could probably be criticized for applying that approach. I'm going to try and baffle you with numbers, but tell the same story, or answer the question the same way as has been answered before. So that's something to me, I think, that also has to be looked at, is simply because you have an analytics strategy in your tool belt, so you know how to do that analysis, that shouldn't drive the question. That the question drives the analyses, the analyses that you know how to do should not drive a question. And I think back to, this is one of a colleague of mine now who is extremely well respected in his field. And his field isn't sport and exercise psychology, but he's extremely well respected. And he said, you know, all I knew how to do was a t-test. So everything I did was a 2-group design. Right now, obviously that's taking us back a very, very long way. But, you know, if you have a certain skill set and you are then saying, well, I want to showcase my skill set, and so I'm going to devise a question to answer that skill set, that uses that skill set, that doesn't mean that your question's impactful or meaningful or adds value to the research. So to me, start with a good question and then tell me why it's important.
That's great advice. I think there's like a lost art almost, right, to research. Sometimes people are so focused on just pumping out papers that, like you said, they forget to write it up in that meaningful way. Like, what is the rationale? Why is it important? What's the impact? You know, like you said with the analysis, I think that's hilarious, because there is definitely a growing trend in that area. So just maybe to wrap things up here, what message would you give to early career researchers, maybe women in particular, around taking on these types of service responsibilities, like an editorial board role?
Sure. Well, I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, that this is service. To me, it's important service, but all of our time is finite. So if you devote time to one thing, what are you pulling away from? Or what are you taking away from? Is it your granting? Is it your publications? Is it your teaching? Is it your family? Is it your health? Is it your personal time and your self-care? And really try to make decisions around things that, again, are personally meaningful for you. So if it is of interest and meaning for you to serve in this kind of role of an associate editor or on an editorial board, then go for it. You know, for me, it was, right? For a host of reasons. It allows me to stay contemporary, for example, and see what's coming out. And it sharpens my skills. So for me,
that, because I think, you know, pre-tenure, people tend to just say yes to everything. And so to think of your time as finite is such a great piece of advice. what are you giving up to take this on, and is it really worth it, right?
Yeah.
That's a great piece of advice.
Yeah. And for me, that was, for me, it was worth it to do. For others, it may not be worth it to do. Some universities also incentivize it a little bit more. So I do know of some colleagues at certain universities that if they take on editorial roles or associate editor roles, they actually get a reduction in, for example, they can use that for reductions in teaching, things like this. The university I'm at doesn't typically do that. But I knew that going into it, right? And that was okay. Like I said, this is something I really do quite enjoy doing. It's allowed me to get to meet other people like yourself a little bit more personally. And so this is actually one of the real benefits associated with it that I couldn't have even have imagined a couple of months ago.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been really fantastic. I think lots of great advice and great stories in here, and I think all of us can benefit from some of those sort of pieces you highlighted around things to think about before you're submitting journal articles, and not to rush them, but take the time to really ensure that you're doing the right, that you're setting the paper up right.
Thank you.
And I think great advice for early career researchers in here as well. So thank you so much for taking the time. And
thank you.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you hopefully in person some days.
I can hope so. We're not that far apart.
No. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care of yourself. Be safe. Be healthy.